2006, the Persian Gulf. Late night. I was a radar intercept officer with the USS Truman Carrier Strike Group. That night, we were conducting a routine maritime security operation. Routine in the sense that it could bore even the most elite sailors to the point their bones felt like they were rusting. The sea looked like a sheet of black glass. No wind, no moonlight. On the infrared scanner, not even a suspicious fishing boat showed up. Inside the Combat Information Center, the only sounds were the low hum of cooling fans and the occasional muffled cough from some corner. Then everything changed. On my and Spy 1D radar screen, 12 blips suddenly appeared. They didn't fly in from the edge. They didn't gradually approach. They just showed up, right in the center of the screen, directly above our carrier strike group at 30,000 feet. Out of nowhere, like someone had taken a hole punch to a perfect sheet of black cardstock and stamped out 12 clean circles. Sitrep, all units, send Sitrep immediately. When I said it over the comms, my voice was steady. Training, muscle memory. But my right hand had already started to tremble because I was looking at the target's movement data. Every single blip was moving in erratic, angular patterns at speeds exceeding 12,000 knots. 12,000 knots. That's Mach 20. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to type. Because based on everything we know about aerodynamics, anything traveling at that speed within the atmosphere should produce massive sonic booms and intense infrared signatures. But our passive sensor array, the full-spectrum signal monitoring system, told me one thing: silence. Absolute silence. No exhaust plume. No engine heat. No electromagnetic emissions from any known propulsion system. They moved like ghosts, like idealized particles that exist only in equations, slipping through physical space without resistance. I know what you're thinking. Radar malfunction? Electronic warfare interference? Some kind of advanced decoy? I thought the same thing that night. I spent 40 full minutes running 3 complete diagnostics and recalibrations on the entire Spy 1D system with my team. Every element of the phased array was functioning perfectly. No errors in the signal processing algorithms. The environmental compensation model matched the Persian Gulf's atmospheric refraction profile exactly. The radar was fine. The problem was, those things didn't match any known model of aircraft. It was my 3rd year on the job. Before that, I believed in God, in the U.S. Navy, in Newton's laws of motion. After that, I didn't believe in anything. Or rather, I started believing one thing, that in the seemingly empty sky above us, there are things the Pentagon neither wants nor dares to tell you about. Welcome to the fog of war. I'll be your narrator. What we're talking about today isn't some distant case from decades ago that can be brushed off as Cold War hysteria or mass hallucination. We're talking about now. April 2026. That moment in a brightly lit hearing room on Capitol Hill, when a congresswoman named Anna Paulina Luna demanded that Department of Defense officials hand over the file list labeled ARO SD 2026-0412, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop to freezing. That list contains 1,000 entries, 1,000 incidents recorded by the U.S. military's most advanced sensor systems, rigorously cross-verified, yet permanently labeled unexplained, because the objects demonstrated instantaneous acceleration without visible propulsion. ARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, was established in 2022 with high expectations, believed to be the agency that would finally unravel the mystery of UAPs. But over the past 4 years, reports have surfaced suggesting it's been doing the opposite, not solving the problem, but hiding it. Not disclosing to the public, but locking the most paradigm-shattering cases into a database accessible to only a select few, while publicly claiming there is no evidence of phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. Today we're opening that door, but I'm not going to read you 1,000 dry case numbers. I'm taking you back to the moments that were deliberately erased, to those fighter cockpits, those radar screens, those pilots flying wingtip to wingtip with wingless things over the Pacific, every hair on their bodies standing on end. Because only when you stand at that edge, the edge where human physics begins to break down, can you understand why some truths are more terrifying than lies. Let me take you to the first case. November 14, 2004. Off the southern coast of California, about 100 nautical miles west of San Clemente Island, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was preparing for a scheduled exercise. The weather that day was nearly perfect, visibility over 10 miles, light winds, waves under 1 meter. ideal conditions for intensive carrier flight operations. But for Commander David Fravor, commanding officer of the Black Aces Fighter Squadron VFA-41, this morning would be anything but routine. Fravor's testimony from a closed hearing was catalogued by AARO as Case 2004-1114A, classified top secret // no foreign. The document was leaked online in 2017 from an unknown source. The Pentagon quickly confirmed its authenticity but refused to comment on its contents. In the roughly 90-minute recording, Fravor's tone evolves, from initial confusion, to certainty, to a deep, bone-level fear he himself seemed reluctant to acknowledge. It's a textbook example of human perception being slowly shattered by external reality. He said the morning briefing had nothing unusual. Standard maritime air defense scenario, intercept a group of simulated hostile aircraft. He took off with 4F divided by a -18F Super Hornets, armed, flying southwest along their assigned patrol route. For the first 40 minutes, everything was normal. Clean radar, casual chatter over comms, routine updates from the command ship. Then the USS Princeton CG-59, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, sent an alert over the Link 16 data link to the entire strike group. The message was brief, but it made Fravor's fingers pause on the stick. Contact, multiple, unidentified, descending from 8,000 feet to sea level. 2 seconds, climbing back to 28,000 feet. Repeat, multiple contacts, no IFF. Fravor keyed his mic. Princeton, Black Aces lead. Say again. Contact parameters, movement profile and speed. The data feed from the Princeton populated his left MFD. Fravor later said he stared at the numbers for a full 5 seconds, then turned to his weapons systems officer, who was looking back at him with the exact same expression. The data read, 4 targets, initial altitude 28,000 feet. In 0.8 seconds, they dropped to 50 feet above sea level. Velocity increased from 0 to an estimated because the Spy-1 tracking algorithm was already losing confidence at that acceleration 12,000 knots. They hovered at sea level for 0.5 seconds, then accelerated back to 28,000 feet. Total time, under 2 seconds. No sonic boom, no contrail, no electromagnetic interference. No human aircraft could survive that level of acceleration. At those G-forces, even reinforced titanium structures would shatter like glass, let alone a human pilot inside. Fravor's first reaction wasn't fear. It was anger. He assumed the Princeton's radar operator had made a rookie mistake, misidentifying electronic interference or a system glitch as real targets. He had his WSO send a simple query over the data link, using an informal bit of Navy aviator shorthand everyone understood. You sure your damn system isn't glitching? The reply from the Princeton shut him up. Black Aces lead. Princeton. Spy-1 confirms on all 4 arrays. Targets corroborated by SPS-49. IRST confirms. ESM detects no known emissions. Repeat, no known emissions detected. Targets emit no electromagnetic signals. No electromagnetic signals. What does that mean? It means, whatever those things were, they weren't using radar to scan the airspace. They weren't communicating. They weren't even leaking the kind of electromagnetic noise any electronic system would produce, if they had electronics at all. They were black. Completely, utterly, physically black. To our sensors, they provided no information beyond their mere physical presence. Commander Fravor later said in his testimony that, in that moment, he felt a kind of isolation he had never experienced before. He was leading 4 of the most advanced carrier-based fighter jets in the world, armed with live ordnance, backed by the full air defense network of an entire carrier strike group. And yet, as he looked at those blips on the radar, he realized something that sent a chill down his spine. He didn't know what those things were, where they came from, what they wanted, or even whether they were friend or foe. Rules of engagement required positive identification before weapons release. But that day, in that vast blue sky over the Pacific, there was nothing for the identification system to interrogate. He made a decision. He turned his formation toward the estimated intercept point. He didn't expect visual contact at 12,000 knots. Those things could cross from horizon to horizon in the blink of an eye. But he wanted to take a chance. He wanted to bet that they would stop, or more precisely, that they would allow themselves to be seen. That decision was later annotated by ARO analysts as behavior of anomalous psychological significance. Because at the exact moment Fravor ordered the turn, the USS Princeton reported a change. The 4 targets altered their movement pattern. They stopped their erratic, almost Brownian zigzag motion and began moving in a loose but clearly coordinated formation toward the projected intercept point of Fravor's flight. As if they knew he was coming. As if they had been waiting. I'm slowing this down on purpose, because what happens next needs to be imagined at the slowest possible pace. Fravor's flight climbed to 20,000 feet and activated all sensors, radar, infrared, electronic support measures, targeting pods. His 4 Super Hornets spread out like spiders crawling across blue silk, carefully extending a search net. He and his weapons systems officer alternated between scanning the radar display and staring out through the canopy. For the first 5 minutes, nothing. Just the endless Pacific and a thin layer of cirrus clouds above. Then his WSO said something over the intercom. Fravor later repeated the sentence word for word, because it marked the dividing line of his life. Before it, he was an atheist. After it, he wasn't sure of anything. 3 o'clock low. Near the surface. White water. White water. A term rarely used in naval aviation, because it describes something on the ocean, not in the air. A patch of churning foam, usually indicating a large object surfacing at speed or some powerful force disturbing the water. But at that moment, with no submarines reported and no surface vessels in the area, hearing that phrase inside a fighter cockpit was itself abnormal. Fravor turned to the right. It took his eyes a full 3 seconds to focus, because what he was seeing fell outside what his visual system could immediately process. On the ocean surface, a patch roughly 50 meters across was violently churning. Not waves, not a ship's wake, not a whale. The water was boiling, not thermally, the infrared sensors showed no heat anomaly, but mechanically, as if something beneath the surface was vibrating at extreme frequency, whipping the sea into white foam. And hovering directly above that patch was an object. Fravor spent a long time describing its shape, because each time he recalled it, he noticed details he had missed before. Eventually, under repeated questioning by ARO analysts, he gave a description that was recorded verbatim. It looked like a white tic-tac. I don't mean that metaphorically. Its shape, proportions, surface reflectivity, it was identical to one of those mints out of the box. No wings, no control surfaces. No canopy, no visible intake, exhaust, rivets, seams, antennas, windows, or markings. None of the features you'd find on any known aircraft. The surface was pure white, smooth like polished ceramic, but it didn't produce specular highlights in sunlight. It seemed to absorb most of the incoming light and only reflect a very soft portion. Size, based on relative scaling, about 46 feet long. A bit more than twice the length of an F divided by a -18E divided by F fuselage. For more precise data, you'd have to ask the Princeton. Their SPY-1 should have had a lock by then. The Princeton did have a lock. According to radar logs, later leaked logs whose authenticity the Pentagon still denies, though every analyst who has seen the raw data confirms the encryption signatures match U.S. military standards. The tic-tac-shaped object was hovering at 50 feet above sea level with a speed of 0. It was completely stationary, suspended above the ocean. The wind moved across its smooth surface, the white water churned violently below, and it hung there as if held in place by an invisible hand. No signs of attitude adjustment. No engine noise. Fravor's canopy was open. He said the only sounds he could hear were the ocean and the distant roar of his wingman's engines. Fravor did what any pilot would do when encountering an unknown. He eased the stick forward, beginning a controlled descent to close the distance for visual identification. At the same time, he ordered his wingmen to hold altitude and bracket from both sides, forming a standard high-low side visual ID formation. The moment he began to descend, the object moved. No acceleration, no ignition, no pre-motion in any direction. In Fravor's view, it went from a stationary point to something the human eye could not track. He said it didn't feel like watching an object move. It felt like watching it disappear from one location and reappear in another. Not continuous motion, but frame by frame. From a hover at 50 feet above the ocean to 28,000 feet, back down to sea level total time, under 1 second. The Princeton's radar recorded a more precise figure, 0.78 seconds. Within that interval, the object executed vertical climb, horizontal displacement, and vertical descent, 3 distinct motion phases. If you calculated each segment separately, The average speed ranged from 8,000 to 10,000 knots. But taken as a continuous motion, its instantaneous velocity, the number that made every physicist uncomfortable, exceeded the Doppler tracking limits of the Spy-1 radar. Fravers sat in his cockpit, watching the white speck bounce between ocean and sky like a marble being tossed back and forth by invisible giants. His grip tightened on the stick, not because he was pulling high GS, he wasn't maneuvering at all, but because his body was reacting at a primal level. You are seeing something you are not supposed to see, and your brain is trying to reject it. He later said something in his testimony that I've never forgotten. In that moment, I realized something. The structure of physics our scientists have spent centuries building, the thing we think is unbreakable, might just be a sandcastle. And those things, whatever they are, moving freely between sea and sky, they're the first wave of the tide coming in. Fravers' encounter is just one of the 1,000 unresolved cases in ARO's archive. But it was among the first to become public, and it became a benchmark for what analysts would later call the anomalous motion signature library. After that, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from restricted airspace over the U.S. mainland to NATO patrol zones in the Baltic, similar reports began appearing with increasing frequency on classified military channels. Let me take you to another case. 2015, off the East Coast, near Virginia. A nighttime air defense exercise involving the USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier. Strike Group. This time, the central figure wasn't a fighter pilot, but an electronic warfare officer aboard an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. For the sake of the story, we'll call him Johnson, not his real name. He remains on a non-public Department of Defense list under communications monitoring and travel restrictions. In 2020, through an intermediary, Johnson provided a 17-page testimony to a non-profit UAP research organization. It was later cataloged by AARO as Case 2015-0722B, classified secret / LTD. Johnson said the exercise that night simulated a high-intensity synthetic battlespace scenario. All ships in the strike group were required to operate under zero illumination and full radar silence, relying solely on passive sensors, infrared, electronic support measures, and sonar to monitor their surroundings. In other words, they were simulating combat under heavy electromagnetic suppression. Johnson's destroyer was positioned on the strike group's port flank, tasked with protecting the carrier's rear quadrant. He sat at the electronic warfare console in the Combat Information Center, facing 3 displays, one showing real-time full-spectrum electromagnetic waveforms, one mapping identified emitters geographically, and a third listing threat alerts. For the first 3 hours, everything was normal. His system picked up dozens of civilian aviation radar signals, a few satellite downlinks, and some stray emissions from coastal broadcast stations. All familiar, all perfectly matched to known signatures in the database. Then, at 2:17 a.m., his full-spectrum analyzer picked up a signal. Johnson said in his testimony that his first reaction was to assume an instrument fault, because he had never seen a parameter combination like this in his entire career. The center frequency was around 3.7 gigahertz. The bandwidth was extremely narrow, an order of magnitude narrower than any known military or civilian radar. But its pulse repetition frequency was absurdly high, approaching 100,000 pulses per second. What confused him even more was the modulation. His spectrum analysis software ran through every known digital modulation scheme: pulse compression, linear frequency modulation, phase coding, frequency hopping. None of them could extract any meaningful data. The signal structure, in his own words, did not belong to any known modulation system. It wasn't radar, it wasn't comms, it wasn't electronic warfare, it wasn't a data link. It didn't resemble anything, but it was definitely transmitting energy. He tagged it as unknown 0722-01, manually elevated its tracking priority, and pulled up a higher resolution analysis module. The moment he opened the second window, the signal vanished. Not fading, not buried in noise. It simply disappeared from the waveform display, as if someone had flipped a switch. Johnson didn't dwell on it. In electronic warfare, transient unknown signals are common, often just brief power-on tests from distant equipment or stray emissions from operator error. He logged it and kept monitoring. 15 minutes later, it came back. But this time, the parameters had changed. The frequency had shifted to 5 gigahertz. The pulse repetition frequency dropped to about 20,000 per second, but the pulse width increased nearly tenfold. Johnson stared at the screen as the signal appeared and disappeared repeatedly over the next 40 minutes. Each time it returned, the parameter set was different, frequency shifting, pulse width changing, repetition rate fluctuating, but still no known modulation pattern matched it. He did what any competent electronic warfare officer would do. He initiated a passive direction-finding routine to locate the source. The destroyer's electronic support measures system used a high-precision interferometric antenna array capable of determining bearing and elevation by measuring time differences of arrival across multiple elements without emitting any signals. Under ideal conditions, accuracy could be within 0.1 degrees. The result appeared 30 seconds later. Johnson said his first thought was that the algorithm had glitched because the bearing pointed directly at the USS Theodore Roosevelt, not near the carrier, not in its vicinity, directly above it, approximately 500 feet over the flight deck. He checked the system diagnostics. All antenna elements were functioning. Calibration parameters were valid. Multipath compensation was active. He had another operator rerun the calculation. Same result. The third time, still the same. That signal, the one he couldn't identify, whose parameters kept shifting, whose modulation didn't match any known system, was originating from a point 500 feet above the carrier, hovering motionless like an invisible beacon, transmitting something in a language they couldn't understand to the entire strike group. Johnson reported it to the bridge. The officer of the watch, a major, patched into his display feed, stared at the waveforms for about 10 seconds, then asked, "What do you think it is?" Johnson said he should have answered, "I don't know." That would have been the most honest, most professional response. Instead, he said, "Sir, I think we should notify the strike group flagship." The call went out at 3:02 a.m. At 3:04, the strike group's air defense commander, a colonel, ordered all ships to activate active sensors and conduct a full scan of the surrounding airspace. That order violated the exercise protocol. The emission control drill ended instantly because the commander judged that an unknown signal source hovering 500 feet above the carrier constituted a direct threat to the group's most critical asset. When the radars came online, the results silenced everyone in the Combat Information Center. The Theodore Roosevelt's own Spy-1 radar detected a large radar cross-section target directly above the carrier, roughly the size of a C-130 transport aircraft. But visually, nothing. Bridge watchstanders saw nothing. The ship's electro-optical systems saw nothing. No aircraft, no helicopter, no drone, no balloon, no birds, nothing that could reflect radar waves. And yet the radar said it was there. Passive direction finding said it was there. Human eyes and optical sensors said it wasn't. It was a contradiction that pushed one of the most advanced naval command teams in the world into collective cognitive dissonance. Radar doesn't hallucinate collectively. For Spy-1 phased arrays all locked onto the same point. The SPS-49 confirmed the contact at the same bearing. Even the auxiliary radar in the electronic warfare suite agreed. 5 independent sensor systems, based on entirely different physical principles, all pointed to the same conclusion. Something large was hovering over the carrier. But optically, there was nothing. Johnson said that night was the longest of his life. He stayed at his console, watching the signal parameters continue to shift, watching the radar cross-section fluctuate, watching optical systems repeatedly report no visual contact. He stayed until dawn. At 6:17 a.m., as the first sunlight touched the flight deck of the Theodore Roosevelt, the signal changed parameters one last time and disappeared. This time, it didn't come back. Afterward, the strike group commander convened a meeting of all department heads. Johnson attended with his division chief. There was only one topic. Everything related to the incident, logs, sensor data, recordings, would be extracted and transferred after the meeting. All personnel, from senior officers to the lowest-ranking operators, were required to sign a standard non-disclosure agreement. But this case, they were told, did not fall under any existing classification category. Instead, it would be placed into a special information control channel, one without an official name. Those who knew about it called it beta cleanse. Johnson signed. He had no choice. Refusal would mean removal from the strike group within 48 hours, a full psychological evaluation, and a permanent mark on his record. As unsuitable for access to sensitive information. He wasn't a coward, but he wasn't a fool either. He understood that some truths come at a cost no individual can bear. That brings me to a word, one that has to appear in this story, even though it chills me every time I say it. Fog. Not just fog. The fog of war. Originally, it was just a term to describe incomplete and uncertain information on the battlefield. You never fully know the enemy's position, strength, or intent, so you make decisions based on probabilities and risk. A concept from Clausewitz's On War, later softened into an academic term, something that could be modeled, quantified, simulated. But what I'm telling you now is this: the fog may not be what we think it is. It may not be a passive byproduct of uncertainty. It may be active. It may not be that we can't see. It may be that we're not allowed to see. Think about it. An object that can accelerate from sea level to 28,000 feet in fractions of a second, with no sonic boom, no exhaust, no electromagnetic emissions, no detectable signature of any kind. It's not invisible because of our technological limitations. It's invisible by choice. It chooses to appear to us as a radar return, an infrared anomaly, an electronic signal, but refuses to present any coherent physical form that fits within our existing framework of understanding. It's like something speaking to us in our own language, but every word is wrong. Every word is something that doesn't exist in our dictionary. That's why Arrow's 1,000 cases are labeled unexplained. Not because our analysts aren't smart enough, not because we lack data, but because the behaviors described in these cases have no explanatory pathway within our existing framework of physics. They are not extensions or refinements of what we know. They are negations of it. Something that can accelerate to tens of thousands of knots in a vacuum without propulsion isn't a more advanced aircraft. It's a product of a different set of physical rules. And if their rules differ from ours, then the way they move through the sky is no more remarkable than the way our fingers pass through smoke. It's not a question of speed, but of dimensionality. That brings me to something you may have already guessed. The line repeatedly emphasized in internal meetings by ARO's first director, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, but never spoken in public. It was leaked from a closed briefing in 2022. A member of the Senate Intelligence Committee asked him a direct question. "What are these UAPs?" Kirkpatrick paused for a long time. Then he said something that reportedly left the room in complete silence. "Senator, the question isn't what they are. The question is whether we are in an observed universe." An observed universe. That choice of words wasn't accidental. Kirkpatrick isn't a philosopher. He's a plasma physicist, a former DARPA program manager. His language is precise. Observed implies an observer, and an observed universe implies that we are not the sole or even primary intelligence surveying reality. We assume we are the ones watching the skies, the oceans, the stars. But what if that's not true? What if those lights that have hovered over our nuclear facilities since the end of World War II, that have lingered above our carrier strike groups, that have flashed past fighter cockpits, what if we're not observing them? What if they're observing us? And if they've been observing us since before we learned how to make fire, then what does it mean that now, in the age when we possess weapons capable of ending all life on this planet, they are appearing more frequently, more boldly, less concerned with being seen? What does that mean? Hold that question. Let me take you back to November 14, 2004, over the Pacific. Commander Fravre's flight was still engaged with the Tic Tac. Or more accurately, the Tic Tac was engaged with them because from the very beginning it was clear who was acting and who was reacting. Fravre said he ran through every standard visual identification maneuver. He changed heading, the object mirrored him. He broke formation and reformed, the object adjusted in sync. He ordered a wingman to lock it with fire control radar, the closest thing to a hostile act. The instant the radar lock engaged, the object repositioned from its previous location to directly behind Fravre's aircraft, within half a nautical mile. Half a mile. About 900 meters. For a supersonic jet, that's nothing. For something that can traverse tens of thousands of feet in fractions of a second, it's less than nothing. It wasn't there because it had to be. It was there because it chose to be. Fravre turned in his cockpit and looked back. The white, cockpitless, featureless Tic Tac hovered steadily at his 6 o'clock, matching his speed, his heading, his attitude perfectly. Like a mirror. He later said that in that moment, what he felt wasn't fear, but a deep, disorienting absurdity. He had spent over a decade training to become one of the world's best aerial combat pilots. He could sustain 9GS, track 20 targets on radar, land on a carrier at night using instruments alone. But now, facing something with no wings, no control surfaces, no cockpit, Nothing he could understand. His training, his weapons, his tactics felt like a caveman holding a sharpened stick against an F-22. He decided to break the stalemate. He shoved the throttles to full afterburner and pulled into the most aggressive maneuver of his career, a vertical climb combined with a maximum G left roll. He wanted to see if it would follow, if it would destabilize in his wake, if it would reveal even the slightest weakness. It didn't follow, because when he looked back, it was gone. The Princeton's data told him where it had gone. In 0.2 seconds, the tic-tac had moved from 900 meters behind him back to the original intercept point, 100 nautical miles west of San Clemente Island, where the patch of white water was still churning. It had returned, as if it had completed something, verified something, decided this human pilot was no longer worth its time. Fravre's flight remained in the area for nearly an hour. The white water gradually subsided. The ocean returned to its unsettling calm. No new radar contacts. ESM remained silent. IRST picked up only distant commercial traffic. The tic-tac did not return. It left as if it had never been there. But Fravre knew it had. His wingmen knew it had. Every operator in the Princeton's Combat Information Center knew it had. Some of the sailors on the USS Nimitz flight deck, those who looked up when the alert sounded, caught a glimpse of a white flash above the clouds. They all knew. And yet, in the hours, days, and years that followed, most of them learned not to talk about it. Not because they were forced into silence, though some key witnesses did sign additional NDAs, but because they chose silence. Because every time they spoke of it, they relived that moment, the moment when the foundation of their understanding of reality cracked. And no one wants to relive that. That's why, nearly 20 years later, when Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna demanded in that April 2026 hearing that the Department of Defense release the 1,000 videos ARO had withheld, the Pentagon's press office reacted with something close to panic. Not because they didn't have the videos. They do. Far more than 1,000. But because they know what happens if those videos are released. Not panic about alien invasion. Not apocalyptic hysteria. Not religious frenzy. Something quieter, deeper, inescapable, cognitive fracture. The realization that physics textbooks, engineering manuals, rules of engagement, even the most basic intuition that tells you objects cannot change velocity without force, may be meaningless in the face of what's actually out there. And if a nation, a military, a civilization loses confidence in its most fundamental assumptions about physical reality, what does it have left? I don't know what Congress will ultimately get. Maybe ARO will release a handful of videos, edited, blurry, easily dismissed as lens flares, birds, or weather balloons. Maybe they'll release all 1,000 and watch them go viral, consumed, memed, reduced to just another conspiracy trend, drowned in the noise until no one really cares. Or maybe they'll keep denying, using procedure, law, and national security as a shield, locking those white tic-tacs and invisible signals away in rooms only they can access. But one thing is certain. Those things are still there, still in our skies, still hovering above carriers, still flashing past cockpits, still observing us in ways we do not understand. ARO's 1,000 cases are just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath them are countless unrecorded encounters, stories told over drinks and forgotten by morning, veterans sitting alone at night, staring at the stars, trying to convince themselves they never saw what they saw. I'm not telling you this to make you afraid. Fear is useful, it makes you run or fight. What I want you to feel is something rarer. That uneasy clarity that comes from realizing how small we are in the face of the unknown. The understanding that human physics, human logic, human reason may be just a single, fragile page in a vast book we haven't yet learned how to turn. I'm your narrator, and I always end with a question. This time, it's this. When that door, holding 1,000 secrets, is finally opened, are we truly ready to see what's behind it? Or are some kinds of fog better left undisturbed? Because what lies beyond isn't clarity, but a deeper, darker fog. The fog of war has never lifted. It has only changed form to remind us that we are not the measure of the universe.